Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast, a breaking news recap episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. I'm your host, Jordan Hill. Got the whole crew with us, Kipp Adams and Ben Wolk, on this Saturday night. Ben and I are still in Sanford Stadium over on the radio level of the press box, getting ready to recap Georgia's 31-13 victory over Auburn. Pretty entertaining game here in Sanford, a game that wasn't really decided until I'd say probably the early minutes of the fourth quarter. Some big plays from Georgia, a big fourth down stop that I thought helped swing the momentum. And number 5 Georgia takes care of business. 8th straight win in the Deep South's oldest rivalry, which is the longest winning streak for either team in the history of this series. Ben, I'm going to start with you because you were here with me on hand in Athens. What immediately stood out to you about this game? A big win for Georgia, a big bounce back from last week's loss at Alabama.
Well, I think it was maybe not exactly as Georgia folks would have envisioned it, or it wasn't the perfect recipe for what they would have liked to see. I think when you lose to Alabama the way that they did, everybody wants to see a comeback into Sanford Stadium, just dominate your opponent from start to finish, not see not see the imperfections that maybe popped up at a few times. But at the same time, I think what you saw today was, one, Kirby Smart's messaging throughout the week made a lot of sense. He was adamant that this Auburn football team was not a football team that you could just walk over if they weren't turning it over, and they did not do that today. And so Georgia wasn't getting the version of Auburn that a lot of these past teams have seen, where you get 2, 3, 4 free possessions. Georgia was not given that the way that some of their other opponents have, and I think that forced Georgia to play a relatively clean football game itself. It definitely did that. So I think that if you're looking for week over week improvements from the Alabama game, I think that was, you saw some, especially on the offensive side of the ball, you saw some positive signs there. Carson was really sharp, really accurate. Trevor Etienne had his first 100+ yard total offense day, both passing or receiving and rushing. You saw some explosive plays down the field. There were some still missed opportunities there. I mean, they try to hit Arian Smith on one that fell incomplete, but I thought that the back shoulder throw to Colby Young that was, the explosive, that key third down on that drive when it was still 14-10. I thought that was a critical juncture in the game where the offense did some things where they had to have successful plays, and they did. Ultimately, I mean, you don't cover the spread in a game like this, but I think that Kirby Smart would happily have taken 31-13 if he had been told that that's what the score could be at the beginning of the game. So I think that all in all, successful win for Georgia. I will note, and I tweeted this out, but it's the first time since 2009 that Auburn has come into Athens and scored more than 10 points. You could even make the case that it was a little bit of a cheapie because Hugh Freeze decided to kick a field goal in a situation where you could have gone either way, going for it or kicking the field goal. So I think that Georgia's probably pretty pleased with the defensive effort. I'm sure there was a lot of head scratching after the one touchdown that it did give up to Jarquez Hunter. Bad tackling has been the name of the game for Georgia's defense at times this year. And I think that was really the only moment of the game where it felt like Auburn was truly threatening Georgia offensively. And so I thought that, sometimes the other team's just going to make some plays. Jarquez Hunter's a really hard runner. Sometimes those things just happen. But all in all, I do think it was a really big weekend for Georgia. And I'm sure we'll talk about some other stuff that happened around the country. But when you see things happen around the country, anytime you can win an SEC game like this one by 18 relatively comfortably, I think that people start to realize why Kirby Smart preaches the messages that he preaches about humility only being a week away.
Go through some of the individual stats of note. Carson Beck, 23 of 29, 240 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions, was sacked twice. Trevor Etienne, 16 carries, 88 yards, 2 touchdowns, also contributed 6 receptions, 36 yards. Dominic Lovett with a touchdown catch, Dylan Bell with a touchdown catch. Dominic Lovett with a touchdown catch that I think Dylan Bell thought was going to be his touchdown catch. Pretty interesting moment there. Really impressed with certain drives in this game, and we'll talk about where I kind of felt like this game swung totally in Georgia's favor in a minute, but pretty impressive game overall. Auburn hung around. Auburn wasn't going to go away quietly, which I don't think should have been a surprise because I talked about this in the lead up to this game. I don't think there was an SEC team this week that needed a win as badly as Auburn just because of the vibes, how things have been going. And they hung around and they had their shots, but Georgia deserves a lot of credit. Again, you only give up the Jarquez Hunter touchdown run, and stuff to clean up from that play, but definitely a good performance on the whole. Kipp, what were your biggest takeaways with just how this thing played out and Georgia improving, bouncing back from the Alabama loss and getting another big rivalry win?
Yeah, I mean, there are some positives to take from this, and I think probably the biggest one would just be the first offensive possession. I would say it was probably, for better or worse, their best drive of the game, and the fact that it was their opening drive. You talked about all season long trying to start fast, right? Well, I mean, scoring a touchdown on your first possession for the first time against an FBS opponent. I mean, there is a plus in that, and yeah, the downside is, I mean, that was it. That was, again, like I said, probably your best possession, and it kind of showed us maybe a little bit more on what this Georgia offense is going to be. Just the fact that it was a 10, 11 play drive for 75 yards. I just think that this is the Georgia that you're going to get, maybe, that they're just going to have to be efficient down the field, dink and dunk, and get chunks of yards. I look at the the explosive plays, the fact that Lawson Lucky had the longest play for scrimmage for Georgia, a 33-yard catch, and so I think that may be who Georgia is. And we learned from Kirby that after the game that he's not a grader, which I thought was entertaining. My good quote from Kirby. You get one or two of those every press conference. But he also just mentioned Jarquez Hunter and the fact that he said that he's embarrassed us for 3 straight years. And I just thought that was an interesting quote. I had to go back because I was like, did he embarrass Georgia for 3 straight years? But he had scored a touchdown against Georgia 3 straight times and back-to-back rushing touchdowns. There aren't many players in the country that can say, hey, I scored a touchdown on Georgia 3 years in a row. I mean, it's just credit to him. He put up NFL draft film against Georgia. But overall, I think it's kind of a meh performance. I mean, Georgia needed to come out here, bounce back, and, they grinded out to another tough win, but they did not show, anything that answers a lot of questions overall about what this team does well. They answered the response as far as accountability coming off a loss, came out there and performed against a team that, they're a more talented team than Auburn. But at the same time, I mean, this was a team that was just turning the ball over every single game, and yet Georgia was unable to force a single turnover against this team. And they're just, I come away from this looking at the defense and going, Kirby Smart talked about them kind of running out of stamina. We're 5 games into the season now, so stamina, if that's an issue, I don't know how you're going to correct something like that. You're going to have to, play more guys, play younger guys, but at the same time, I mean, the tackling issues are still there. And if I'm going to take a positive from the defense, they did get pressure early in the game and got some plays from their defensive front that shows some promise. And so you take that and you just try to get more of that consistently over 4 quarters and not kind of run ragged, which is what it looked like Georgia's defense did today.
One thing I also wanted to throw in there that I forgot to bring up as well, I thought the turning point of that football game was Kirby Smart's decision at the end of the first half, whether to kick the field goal or punt. And we were even having the discussion in the press box, like, what do you do in this situation? It's 56-yarder. Peyton Woodring has looked like nails so far this year. He's clearly got the leg for it. Auburn hasn't been moving the football well up to that point. Georgia's offense hasn't been perfect up to that point. Like, what do you do in that situation? Kirby even admitted it post-game that it was a really hard decision for him to make in that moment because it wasn't just a clear-cut, this is what you got to do in this situation. And he ended up electing to punt it, which I'm sure people have complained about Kirby Smart conservatism at the end of halves in the past, and so they might have been yelling at their TVs asking about that. And the punt's perfect, gets down to the 3 by Dom Lovett. Auburn does them a little bit of a favor by trying to take a shot so they're not having to use all their timeouts there. And then next thing you know, Georgia's got the ball at midfield with a timeout, chance to go down the field. They end up scoring, take a 14-3 lead. He also mentioned that really makes him look smart if they come out of the second half and score a touchdown, which they did, and they had a bad first drive of the second half. So it doesn't make it the perfect sequence. That said, I think that moment, making it a 14-3 game when you could have been looking at a missed field goal from Peyton Woodring that Auburn ends up only needing to go 20 yards to kick a field goal, and all of a sudden it's 7-6 at halftime instead of 14-3. I ultimately believe that decision and the execution by the punt unit was the reason why Georgia was able to get out of this one with pretty much zero discomfort in the second half. I mean, aside from that one possession where it was 14-10 and they had to hit that third down play from Carson to Colby Young, there really wasn't a moment in that second half where you started to fret for Georgia. And I think that, again, that end of first half decision making is the reason why.
And that was huge, and I wanted to make sure to bring that up because I thought that was tremendous by Dom Lovett to get down there to down that. And then, again, if I looked at Kirby Smart in-game just over the years, I would say his weakness has been the 2-minute warning, whether it was the first half or the second half, and they played it really well. Carson winds up hitting Dom Lovett for that touchdown with 17 seconds left. And then even on the other end, Auburn tries to kick a long field goal. Dan Jackson, look, I know he wasn't perfect today. There were a few moments where you saw him give up some plays. He has had a fantastic 2 or 3 games, and he blocked that field goal. And again, my point going into halftime, you've really got a chance to deliver the knockout punch if you go down there and score to start the second half. Now, Georgia didn't do that, but then made some big plays going forward. Other things I want to make sure and point out, Trevor Etienne I thought was tremendous. I read his stats earlier. I thought he did a really good job. Ty Ingram Dawkins, 2 early sacks. To have him playing like he's been playing, I think is huge, especially with Michael Williams very limited. We saw him on some third downs early. I'll have to go back on Sunday and look at his snap counts, but he really wasn't out there all that much. Saw a lot of Chris Cole today with no Smile Munden. It was mainly Jalen Walker and Raylan Wilson picking up the slack with Smile gone. And Kirby, very shockingly, didn't have a whole lot to say about Smile afterwards. Said, yeah, he's injured. I don't even know if Kirby mentioned that it's a foot injury, so we're still going to be watching to see when Smile comes back. Thought that was promising, just how those guys played. Other things that stood out, again, impressed with the special teams. You hold on to the ball, you don't turn it over. It was a surprise that you were not able to turn them over, but good that you held on to the ball. This first half, and I think it was more so the first half than the second half, just not a lot of possessions. I'm going to have a story on Sunday about why flipping that right before halftime and then even jumping to that fourth quarter where they stop Auburn on fourth down, that was tremendous in a game with not a lot of possessions. And Ben, I want to set you up. That fourth down play by Auburn, you were talking about it at the time, and then it came out afterwards that you kind of made a true prediction. But, it's a fourth down. Peyton Thorne holds it, tries to run to his right, realizes, oh, crap, I'm not going to get this. I'm going to try to turn back. Raylan Wilson gets there. Jalen Walker gets there, stuffed. You gave some good analysis up here in the press box of what you thought happened, and then wound up being true.
Well, it looked live like Peyton Thorne went rogue. And again, I have no idea what the call is. I have no idea what his responsibilities are. But I'm sitting here thinking, Hugh Freeze is an offensive genius, right? That's what people like to say about him. And he found himself in a situation where you've got to convert that fourth down, or it's essentially the game is over. And he started his opening statement today saying that they already had a disappointing season. So, I mean, for him, I think that fourth down was his year. And I just thought there's no way that's the play call that Hugh Freeze is going with, saying, I want Jarquez Hunter, who cannot be stopped for a half a yard gain in this game. Let me give the ball to Peyton Thorne on a pull that just gets blown up immediately. I thought whether or not it was Peyton Thorne's responsibility or not, we were going to hear Hugh Freeze in post-game say that Peyton Thorne had done something incorrect on that play. And sure enough, that was the answer that was given for that fourth down call, that it was a Peyton Thorne freelance, for lack of a better phrase. And so, sometimes my eyes don't deceive me. Sometimes I actually do know what I'm watching. It might be few and far between, but every now and again.
On that same note, guys, I called the final score. I don't know if either of y'all noticed that. I said 31-13, so I hate patting myself on the back, but going to do it right now. Other thing I wanted to point out, Georgia much better on third down today, 7-13, after they came into this game only converting a third, 33.33% of their third downs. I thought that was big. again, today was the first time they've scored any points in the first quarter against an FBS opponent. Auburn's bad. Auburn's not an FCS team. So that was big just to kind of get that monkey off their back. And hey, let's shout out Drew Bobo. Comes out here, makes his first start. If folks will remember, he was a one-time Auburn commit when his dad was the offensive coordinator there. They make the change where that Mike Bobo is not going to be there. Decommits, winds up following Mike to Georgia. And from what I saw, I thought Drew did a pretty good job. High snaps early. I think he kind of settled in. With Jared Wilson, Kirby explained after the game that he was basically ready in emergency. He was running with the second team beforehand, and Kirby basically said they didn't want to push it on. I think it was an ankle, if I'm not mistaken, and they didn't want to push it. But if it was an emergency, they could have put Jared Wilson out there. But I'll be interested just to see if Jared is healthy, if he comes back next week. So that'll be something to watch. Christian Miller was asked about. He had a knee injury. It was announced in the press box he was out with, I want to say, a left knee injury. Kirby acted like he thought he was going to be okay, said that he had iced it on the side as the game was going on, and that basically it got to a point in the game where, Christian might not have necessarily been back out there. So that was definitely valuable there. Before we take a break, guys, and we'll talk about some other stuff kind of unrelated to this game, any parting thoughts, anything we haven't gotten to about tonight? And I'll start with you, Kipp. Anything that you don't feel like we've tackled from this game? Again, a 31-13 victory over Auburn.
Yeah, tackles. You nailed it. I think that's kind of where, not to be doom and gloom, but I think it's another game where we saw not necessarily missed tackles in this game, but they weren't getting off blocks and they were taking, bad angles and just allowing chunks of plays. And, just to go right back to what Kirby said, it kind of stood out that, he chose that moment to throw my Falcons under the bus and say that he just watched the Falcons play and said tackling's awful all over. He just said it's just bad tackling. We've got bad tackling. That's the culture of football, that people don't tackle, people don't hit. And I just thought that was fascinating. He's like, it's not just us guys. The other team here is doing it too. So I just never, thought I would hear Kirby Smart say something like that. And yeah, I just think we need to go ahead and realize that those defenses we talked about, they're not walking back through the door. This is the kind of Georgia team that you have. And it's a situation where I think the defense might get better as the season goes on. It should, because you have a lot of guys playing important snaps for the first time. But I think, they're not going to have this huge jump from how they've played so far, because I just think it's a personnel thing. I don't think this defensive line is going to do the same things that you saw a defense with multiple first rounders do. So you're going to have to play in different ways. And so I think it means they're probably going to have to play more aggressive and take more chances.
Dogs HQ's Jake Rowe, when we were up there, at one point compared Peyton Thorne to Michael Vick with the way that the Georgia defense was making him look. I give Peyton some credit. He missed some throws, but he got out of trouble a few times. And Kipp, you don't know how tempted I was when Kirby said, yeah, I was watching the Falcons and all the tackling. When he quit talking, I really wanted to chime in and just be like, well, that's the Falcons. I mean, like that should not be an indictment on the rest of football. Don't judge anything by how the Falcons are doing. Hey, they won. Rise up. Ben, before I throw it back to you, a couple things that popped in my head while we were talking here. London Humphreys coming back was huge. He had some big catches. Colby Young, I like the way they saw him and used him on Saturday. I thought that was big. Wanted to make sure to mention London, because to get him back was even a surprise. Kirby said we thought he was going to be out for a couple weeks, and all of a sudden I get a call on, whatever, Thursday or Friday, and he's ready to go. So that was big. I do think that was big for the offense. And then we saw some more Nate Frazier. He didn't play a ton, but he was back out there. I just like seeing his burst. He gives you something when he gets that ball. He's still got to work on ball control. You can kind of see that there was a few times you were sort of like, you better be careful there. But good to see him back out there. Ben, parting thoughts on this game. Any final thoughts from here now?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to bring up London Humphreys as well, just because I think this Georgia offense has been in search of people that can provide some bigger playability. And I mean, just across the board today, I mean, Lawson Lucky had a 33-yard catch. London Humphreys had a 25-yard catch. Colby Young had a 27-yard catch. You look in the running game, Trevor Etienne had a 23-yard run. Nate Frazier had a 17-yard run. Dylan Bell had an 18-yard run. So like they were finding ways with a bunch of different people to actually make some impact down the field, and whether that be in the passing game or the running game. And again, I don't think that you're looking at this Georgia team saying that they're going to be rattling off 70-yard explosives over and over and over again. But I think those bigger chunk passing plays, rushing plays are going to be the way that you win the big games later on in the season. And so I think that it's been important for them to try and find as many people as possible that are capable of doing things in different ways. I mean, even in, some people might roll their eyes when I say this, but I mean, Cash Jones has an opportunity late in the game where he gets, it seems like a simple play and he ends up making a couple people miss. He ends up, getting about 17 yards on that one. So I think that Georgia is adding to its arsenal of more and more guys that I think they trust to try and make some, again, I hesitate to say big plays because when you say big plays, people are thinking 72-yarders to Ryan Williams. That's not what I'm saying here. I'm saying guys that can make a difference down the field. And I think that Georgia found maybe a few other ways or options that they could get that done today. And so I think as you prepare for 2 weeks from now, finding as many of those guys as possible is your best bet.
Take a quick break, come back, talk about some good and not good recruiting news for Georgia. And, guys, we're going to talk about Alabama. Welcome back, everybody. Well, Ben, let's start with some good recruiting news for Georgia on Saturday morning. They kind of got a win over Auburn before this game started. Usmani Chroma commits to Georgia, 4-star running back from Lee County. Ben, tell us about this recruitment and how Georgia was able to win this thing. First, you have to unmute.
Oh, my gosh. Kipp, what have you done to me? So I think this is a huge win for Georgia. I think it's especially a huge win for Josh Crawford. And I think the reason for that is when he came to Georgia as Georgia's running backs coach, I think that you had to look at Georgia. They already had Bo Walker in the class, and he had to look around the country, around the state, and say, who's the guy that I want to go get as the second running back in this class? And Georgia had some other options, some guys that we've written about at Dogs 24/7. But I think that he sort of handpicked Usmani Chroma very early from the time that he got here. And that's not to say that Georgia didn't already have Usmani Chroma on their radar. Del McGee recruited him. He'd been on visits in the past. Georgia was definitely a top school. But it really wasn't until Josh Crawford got on the staff that I think Georgia became a legitimate place that Chroma could see himself committing to. And so we've talked about it before, but I'll say it again. He has the relationships with the Chroma family. Josh Crawford was on the Lee County staff in 2017 when they won a state championship. Usmani Chroma's older brother was on that football team as well. There were relationships there that helped Josh Crawford get into this recruitment deeper, faster than a lot of other people would have been able to in the same position at Georgia. I mean, not to say that the Georgia running back room doesn't have pull, but it has a lot more pull when you know the family, when you've coached on the staff at the school that player is at. And so I think that Josh Crawford always knew that Usmani Chroma was the guy that he wanted to sign in this class. I think that there were probably questions within the building. Just, is he the right guy? Does Georgia have a chance to go and get him? And I think the turning point happened at some point over the summer when Josh Crawford started to make clear about the message that he was the guy to Usmani, that he was the guy that Josh wanted to sign at running back. And I think that Mike Norvell had done an incredible job with this recruitment, but personally done an incredible job with this recruitment for most of Usmani's early years as a recruit. And I think that Florida State coming into this year was the favorite to get him. I think that Auburn, Hugh Freeze took a really hands-on approach to this recruitment, and he did a really good job late in the summer to make an impression on Chroma, when Chroma has even admitted in the past that him and his mom at times weren't crazy about Auburn because of the way that they had handled his recruitment. And so I think Kirby Smart was not as hands-on in this recruitment as some of the other head coaches were until late summer, as they got into the early fall. And I think that there were two visits. I think that the official visit, the last one that Usmani Chroma took in June, gave him a chance to really sit down with Kirby Smart for the first time and have some real serious conversations that he wanted to have. And I think that Georgia positioned itself then to be in a great spot, but it was still going to be a fight. And I think that as the football season got in, or as we got into the football season, Florida State was struggling. Auburn was struggling. He came on a week 2 visit to Athens, and from talking to Usmani and people around him, he came on a visit for the Tennessee Tech game week 2, and he got a chance to sit down with Kirby Smart for close to an hour and ask him, everything that he wanted to know. And I'll say this, I've talked to Usmani Chroma a bunch. He is a very thoughtful young man. The way that he thinks about things, when you ask him a question, he's not just going to answer it and hope that you move on to the next question. He's going to genuinely think about the question that you asked him and try and give a super thoughtful response. And I think that because of that, coaches had to approach him differently, because he actually, he's going to ask them questions that other recruits just aren't going to be comfortable asking, because they don't have a confidence and a wherewithal and a thoughtfulness about him the way that Usmani did. And so I think that September 7th visit, where he got a chance to really sit down and say, it's not just Josh Crawford that's coming after me. I'm not having to, put all my eggs in the running backs coach's basket and hope that everything works out there. Like, this is a program that is making clear to me that I am now their top guy. And I'll also say, he's one of the best football players that I've seen since I got back covering, started covering Georgia recruiting for Dogs 24/7. There are things about his game, straight line speed, that people have asked questions about in the past. Every time that I've gone to see Usmani play football, he's been crazy productive. His stats are insane on a weekly basis. I mean, this is a guy that, he's even said it to me personally, like, he wants to rush for 2,000 yards because he feels like that's the next thing he's got to do to try and, do something that he hasn't done yet. This is a guy that rushed for 20 touchdowns as a sophomore. He rushed for 20 touchdowns as a junior. They have one of the best rushing attacks in the state of Georgia this year. So he's just a 6'1", 215-pound physical back. He's got all the intangibles that you want. That's someone that you just want in the locker room. And so, I was going back and forth with some folks at Georgia after he made his decision. And one of the pieces of feedback that I got is just how special they feel like this kid is. I think that it goes beyond just the football player with him. I think that they think that this guy is just wired in a different way. And I'll also say, I think he's complementary to what Bo Walker does as a running back. And I think that makes those two a really good fit for Georgia in this class.
All right, Ben, let's talk about the other recruiting news from Saturday with Georgia defensive line commit Stephon Shivers reopening his recruitment. Kind of an odd situation from the outside looking in. What can you tell us about that recruitment and just what to know going forward?
Yeah, well, I'm learning to be a little bit more deliberate with my what people are saying when they're describing what they're doing with their recruitment, because this is 2 Saturdays in a row where we've had a Georgia commit reopen his recruitment and then have to later clarify that he's still committed and not decommitting. And so I'm not even going to get into it right now in terms of what I think that means, or whether that's a trend that we have to start expecting for certain types of recruitments. I did start to get word in the middle of this week that I thought that was a recruitment that I needed to start paying a little bit more attention to. It's something that we kind of just put on the back burner since the spring. And it makes sense when you start to look around at all the other defensive linemen that Georgia's recruiting. We know about the 5 stars, Justice Terry, who was back in Athens today, Elijah Griffin, who will be on his official visit next weekend. You look today, the defense, Georgia's got Christian Ingram, Joseph Mbachu, Josiah Victor, Braxton Kyle. Usmani Chroma commits to Georgia today, and one of his high school teammates, Jeremiah McLeod's committed to Florida. I think that, Georgia's a place that he would really like to be right now as well. And so I think that it's probably a situation where Georgia is going to have more defensive linemen that want in than they are going to have spots for defensive linemen. I think that's a spot that Georgia loves to be in because they don't feel like they can ever have too many defensive linemen. So I think that, Stephon is, I'm sure, wanting to keep his options open and be aware of what's available for him. I think that Georgia definitely has some other choices along the defensive line that they would, it goes without saying that Justice Terry and Elijah Griffin are going to be higher on the board than any defensive lineman anywhere, committed or uncommitted. So there's clearly guys that Georgia is going to be prioritizing down the stretch that they feel like they need to land more than even some of the guys that they already had committed in the class. So as of right now, we're showing, Stephon Shivers as a commitment in the class. We'll continue to monitor it. I'm sure that I'll have some updates. I did talk with him this morning very briefly, and he, like Thomas Blackshear last week, who was in Athens today, by the way, he wanted to make clear to me that he's still committed and that he never said that he was decommitted. And so we'll see what that ends up meaning, a few weeks or months from now. I mean, it's not too long before these guys are going to be signing. So we'll get answers here in the next couple of months. But I think that Georgia is going to be just fine along the defensive line this cycle. And there are other guys in this class that are maybe even committed other places that I maybe would consider more likely to sign with Georgia than Stephon Shivers at this point in time.
Guys, a little inside baseball for the folks listening who don't know exactly how our jobs work. A lot of the time when we are watching these games live on hand in attendance, like Ben and I were today, you don't see a lot of other games. You might see clips here and there. And I say that to say Fox Mulder on YouTube, roll cried. Alabama loses 40-35. Now, I caught just bits and pieces of it. I was kind of hearing secondhand play-by-play while we were waiting on Kirby Smart. We hear Vanderbilt wins. Kipp, I'm hoping you might have got to watch a little bit of that, and I'll go into the stats in a second. But I'll just set you up. What the hell happened in Nashville today?
It was magic, man. I mean, I think that now we have to go back and look and say Vandy had a chance to be 5-0 right now. They fumbled on their first possession against Georgia State, had a chance to win late against Missouri. Both of those games on the road. It's tough to win in the SEC, especially on the road. And I think we're going to look back on this and see that it was the ultimate rat poison by Nick Saban. I mean, you're never going to have better rat poison than him saying on game day today that the only place you play in the SEC that's not hard to play is in Vanderbilt. And he pointed out that you have more fans there than they have, which we've seen that happen with Georgia games, every other year. But at the same time, I mean, that is – you can't get any better than that as far as the rat poison. But I think at the same time, Alabama came out flat and just flat out couldn't defend Vanderbilt. Their quarterback was making plays left and right. Diego Pavla was out there putting on his own Heisman film. And, I mean, the man's now 2-0 against the state of Alabama, and so – he's got a legacy, and if you're never going to have to pay for a beer the rest of your life, Nashville is probably one of the best cities in the world to never have to pay for a beverage again. So, I mean, it was huge for him, and I mean, I know Georgia fans can just be frustrated. Why not us? But I'm sure that Alabama team was still probably licking its wounds after that game. And if you want to go out there tonight and tell people that you broke Bama and take some credit for it, I mean, who's to question you? Because at least for the next couple of days, there's not much Alabama's going to be able to say about it. But I will say this. I feel really, really, really bad for South Carolina right now because they have to go on the road to play Tuscaloosa next after getting just completely obliterated by Ole Miss. And it's probably not going to go well for the Gamecocks. I just think that this Alabama team is going to probably put up whatever number they want to next week. But for now, I mean, this was the biggest upset we've seen in decades. And obviously Vanderbilt's biggest win probably, in the last century. So good for them. They're going to have a lot of fun on Broadway. I saw the goalpost has already made its way there. And just good luck to everybody. Stay safe.
Yeah, Clark Lee heard Nick Saban this morning and said the MJ, and I took that personally. Or maybe Diego Pavia did. Good for him. Helped New Mexico State beat Auburn last year. Jalen Milroe Heisman campaign, grand opening, grand closing for about a week. I mean, the stats weren't very good. Vanderbilt, 26 first downs, Alabama's 17. Vanderbilt, 12 of 18 on third down. Alabama, 3 of 7. Vanderbilt 418 total yards of offense, 394 for Alabama. Alabama turned the ball over twice. Vandy did not. I'm kind of leaving this open, and Ben, you can jump in. What's the last upset of this magnitude? The two that I thought of when we were discussing with some of the other folks on the beat was App State over Michigan or Stanford over USC. I think those games had bigger point spreads because in the grand scheme of things, it was only like 22.5 points. But this is freaking Vanderbilt we're talking about against Alabama. Like Kipp said, I mean, it's definitely the biggest win for Vanderbilt, probably since they stepped away from wearing leather helmets. But I mean, again, in the grand scheme of things, it's one of the biggest upsets I've seen in college football in quite some time.
Well, I think just given what we saw from Alabama last week, it makes it that much more of an upset this week. I can't believe that happened. Like we were down there doing interviews with players, and then when you went in to go to Kirby, I came back up to the press box, and I'm walking up to the press box. I'm walking along the Georgia sideline. All their staffers that are cleaning up and doing stuff over there, they've all got their phones up watching the Bama game. I go up through the elevator. Every Georgia fan I see, there's at least one of them that's got the Bama game up on their phone. So people were very locked into that one. I'm sure there are some mixed emotions of like, how does Vanderbilt do that after what Georgia did, the week before? But I think to Kipp's point, and Georgia fans can go out tonight and take credit for all of it and breaking Alabama, but there's some merit to, you don't play Georgia and then just turn around the next week and everything's going to be all rosy. It is hard to get up for Georgia. It is hard to play well enough to beat Georgia, and then to just physically and mentally respond from beating Georgia is such a difficult task that even if it's Vanderbilt on the other side, even if you're going into the easiest stadium in the SEC, and I think Kirby Smart was asked about this game in his press conference. I think he conveniently arrived for his press conference about 20 seconds after Vanderbilt entered victory formation. So I feel like he was probably paying attention to it. And I said this as I was watching it up in the press box. Kirby Smart has to be the happiest man in America that Alabama lost today, and it has nothing to do with Alabama being the team that lost. It's just he says humility is a week away as many times as he possibly can, and I think that unless Georgia's losing, he doesn't feel that his players are truly understanding and believing that. And I think that he will be able to look across to his team and say, look what Alabama did to you, and then look what happened when they played Vanderbilt the next week. Truly anything is possible in this league if you're not ready. And, the more weird stuff like this happens, the more I'm inclined to believe him.
Two quick things. Here's part of what Kirby said about the Vanderbilt beating Alabama. Quote, nothing shocks me about our league. So Texas A&M, Missouri, which was another kind of surprising game. A&M beating the hell out of Missouri today. Welcome to the SEC. It's hard every week, and I got a feeling that it's not going to stop. And my only other point, Del McGee, transitive victory over the Alabama Crimson Tide. Way to go, Del McGee. Absolutely outstanding. Couple of other quick things before we get out of here. A&M 41-10 over Missouri, as I just mentioned. Ole Miss 27-3 over South Carolina. Vanderbilt 40-35. I'm never not going to read that and not laugh. Florida 24-3 at halftime as we're recording this. Tennessee just took the lead 7-3 early in the third quarter against Arkansas. All right, Kipp, any parting thoughts just on this weekend, Georgia, anything at all before we end this episode?
Hey, man, a win's a win. I think you took some things here you can work on as far as the offense. You got to give Michael Williams a break if possible. He was out there playing, credit to him, but you could tell he's still working through it. And, I think that credit to Trevor Etienne. I mean, he's Georgia's offense right now. He's their best playmaker. And I think if you continue to give him the ball and you continue to get more confidence in Nate Frazier, then you're going to have more success in the ground game. And I think that's the positive you take from this is that there is some evidence that you can have a strong ground game here. You have a couple of really talented backs to start giving them the ball.
Ben, they're getting ready to kick us out. Give us some final thoughts.
I do think that this was a good win for Georgia. I think that they needed to obviously have some kind of positive outcome. Maybe the positive outcome they needed was just to see Bama lose. I don't know. But I think that every single person watching this that is a Georgia person, I'm sure is going to feel like this was a successful day, even though they were maybe screaming at their TV as Georgia was punting up 7-3 at the end of the first half. But that's just the way college football goes. And, I'm looking around some scores across the country right now. I'm not sure that the excitement of college football is done for the day either. So I'm excited that we might actually get to watch some of these good games here to end the night.
For sure. Well, let's get out of here on that. I appreciate you guys for popping on. Thanks to everyone who watched us. We've got nearly 2,000 people streaming this live. Thank you so much for doing that. Thanks to everyone who is watching and listening to it after the fact. Go to dawgs247.com. We're going to have a lot of content out of this. Ben's going to have a lot of recruiting news, a lot of visitors who made the trip to Sanford on Saturday. Go to our YouTube, go to our TikTok, check it out, get ready for another big week. Georgia with another home game next week hosting Mississippi State. So for Kipp Adams and Ben Wolk, I'm Jordan Hill. Until next time, take care, everybody.